Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light, piercing through the weathered roof of the old barn. Elena Vasquez stood in the doorway, her calloused hands clutching the crumpled deed that had cost her last dollar. At 47, life had taken more than it had given, her husband to illness, her son to the city, and her dignity to poverty. The barn wasn't much, but it was hers. As her eyes adjusted to the darkness, something caught her attention, an odd shape beneath decades of hay and debris. Not the rat's nest she feared, but the curved leg of what appeared to be a chair. An ornate gold-leafed chair that had no business being in a forgotten barn on the edge of a dying village. What other treasures lay hidden in this humble structure, and why were they abandoned as if someone had fled in haste? Could this discovery change everything for a woman who'd long ago stopped believing in second chances? The weathered dollar bill had been hidden inside Elena's Bible for 3 months. She'd found it wedged between the floorboards while cleaning the Alvarez home, where she scrubbed floors twice weekly for barely enough to buy corn and beans. Elena had pressed the crinkled note flat, staring at Washington's faded face, knowing this unexpected find might mean the difference between eating and going hungry during the harshest week of winter. Valdeflores hadn't always been a village of empty storefronts and abandoned hope. 20 years ago, the lumber mill had employed most of the men, including her Mateo. The village square bustled with weekend markets, and children played in streets that didn't feel quite so dusty. But when the mill closed, everything withered. Young people left first, then businesses, until only the stubborn and the stranded remained. "A fool and her money," muttered Senora Diaz when Elena handed over the dollar for the deed. The village council had seized the abandoned barn for unpaid taxes years ago, considering it worthless, except for the land it occupied, and in Valdeflores, even land held little value anymore. "What will you do with it?" the older woman asked, reluctantly writing out the crude deed. "It's hardly fit for animals, let alone people. Firewood, perhaps," Elena had answered, though the truth was more desperate. Winter approached, and the roof over her rented room leaked terribly. The landlord had made it clear he wanted her gone, preferring to let the building collapse empty, rather than make repairs. The barn might provide shelter, however crude, until spring. 3 years since Mateo's passing had taught Elena hard lessons about survival. The village that had brought casseroles and sympathy in the first weeks after the funeral quickly returned to their own troubles. When the chronic cough began, they couldn't afford the medications that might have saved him. Elena had watched her husband grow thinner, weaker, until one morning his chest no longer rose and fell beneath their threadbare blanket. Miguel had tried to stay and help his mother. At 20, he worked whatever odd jobs appeared, bringing home a few dollars when someone needed fence mending or car repairs. But a village without prospects was a prison for a young man. When the letter came offering factory work in the city, 300 miles away, Elena insisted he go. "I'll send money," he'd promised, embracing her at the bus stop. Some small amounts had come at first, then less frequently, then birthday cards with apologetic notes about hard times. Elena understood. The city had swallowed her son, not maliciously, but with the indifferent appetite of a place where everyone struggled. She'd aged a decade in 3 years. Her once black hair now streaked with silver, face lined from squinting against sun and grief. Her hands, once admired by Mateo for their elegance despite farm work, had grown knotted and rough. At 47, Elena had become invisible. Another weathered village woman, wrapped in faded clothes, carrying the weight of diminished hope. The barn stood at the edge of the village, past the cemetery where Mateo rested beneath a wooden cross. It had once belonged to the vast Montalve estate, before that family vanished decades ago during political upheavals. Local children claimed it was haunted. Adults simply saw it as useless, too rotten for storage, too small for livestock. Elena had walked out alone that morning, key in hand, wondering if he'd wasted her precious dollar. The structure looked worse than she remembered. A sagging roof, weathered grey boards, rusted hinges on doors hanging askew. Even scavengers had abandoned it after taking anything of obvious value. After working the stiff lock, she'd pushed open the door, releasing the musty breath of decades. The dim interior revealed scattered hay, old farm implements, generations of dust. This would be her home now, a place abandoned by all others, where her desperation would go unseen. Then her eyes fell upon the curved leg of the chair, its gilt surface catching a beam of sunlight through a hole in the roof. And in that moment, Elena Vasquez felt something she'd forgotten existed. Hope. Elena brushed decades of dust from a yellowed parchment found wedged behind a loose board. As it unfolded in her trembling hands, the faded lines revealed themselves, a detailed map of Valdeflores and the surrounding countryside from 1925, bearing the elegant Montalvo family crest in its corner. The map showed a different village than the dying place Elena knew. Here was Valdeflores in its prime, with the grand Montalvo estate dominating the northern hills. The barn, her barn, appeared as a minor outbuilding near the estate's southern boundary, connected to the main property by a narrow trail now long overgrown. Old Senor Vega had spoken of the Montalvos when Elena was a child. Sitting in the village square, the aging man would tell children about the family that once employed half the village. They were not like other wealthy families, he'd say, rheumy eyes gazing toward the distant hills where the estate once stood. Don Alejandro Montalvo knew every worker by name. The Christmas feasts at the great house were open to all villagers. Elena remembered her grandfather nodding in agreement. The old Don brought doctors when the fever swept through in 22, paid for medicines himself. The Montalvo legacy loomed large in Valdeflores history. 5 generations of a family that had built their fortune in shipping and expanded into banking and agriculture. Their estate housed one of the finest private art collections in the province, gathered through European travels and family connections to Spanish nobility. Then came the political upheavals of the night. The stories grew gure here, hushed voices speaking of midnight raids and accusations of treason. Elena's knowledge came in fragments: wealthy families targeted, property seized, midnight escapes. One morning in 1937, villagers woke to find the Montalvo estate eerily silent. The entire family, Don Alejandro, his wife Carmen, their children Isabella and Rafael, and the elderly grandmother, had vanished overnight. Government officials descended within days, combing through the estate for valuables and documents. The main house was eventually repurposed as a regional administrative center until a fire gutted it in the 1950s. The land was parceled off, buildings dismantled for materials. Only this forgotten barn, too remote and seemingly worthless, had escaped thorough examination. Rumors persisted for years. Some claimed the family had been executed secretly. Others insisted they'd fled to relatives in France or Argentina. Children whispered about hidden treasures the Montalvos couldn't carry in their hasty departure. Elena had dismissed these as village fables, until now. She carefully refolded the map, mind racing. If the ornate chair belonged to the Montalvos, what else might be hidden here? The barn's remote location suddenly seemed less like poor fortune, and more like deliberate choice. A place overlooked, forgotten, perfect for concealing valuables from those who seized the estate. Elena recalled Senora Martina, who at 93 was the village's oldest resident. As a young girl, she had worked in the Montalvo kitchen. Perhaps she might recognize the chair, or know something of the family's final days. The afternoon sun was lowering as Elena made her way to the tiny house at the edge of the village square. Senora Martina, hat in her customary spot on the porch, gnarled hands resting on a cane, eyes that had witnessed nearly a century of village life still sharp in her deeply lined face. "I've bought the old Montalvo barn," Elena said after greetings were exchanged. The old woman's eyebrows rose slightly. "Have you now? And what would possess you to waste good money on that wreck?" "It was only $1, Elena replied, hesitating before continuing. "I found something strange inside, an ornate chair that looks far too fine for a simple barn. Senora Martina's face changed, the dismissive expression giving way to sudden intensity. A chair? What kind? Gold-leafed, with red velvet, carved with grapevines and birds. The old woman's hands tightened on her cane. The morning room, she whispered, Doña Carmen's favorite place for reading. Those chairs were custom-made in Barcelona. What would it be doing in the barn? Senora Martina leaned forward. Child, there were rumors in those last days. Don Alejandro knew trouble was coming. Some said he was preparing, moving valuables away from the main house. She glanced around, though no one was near. My father helped with some night work at the barn 2 weeks before they vanished. He never spoke of what they moved. Elena's heart quickened. Then there might be more? If there is, the old woman said, lowering her voice further, be careful who discovers your secret. Some families in this village have carried guilt for generations about what happened to the Montalve. Old sins cast long shadows. As dusk fell, Elena walked back toward her barn, the map tucked safely in her pocket, and a growing sense that she had stumbled into something far larger than a chance discovery of a single valuable chair. Dawn broke with Elena already making her way to the barn, a borrowed shovel and broom in hand. Sleep had proven impossible, her mind racing with possibilities and questions. She'd told no one of yesterday's discovery, instinctively understanding the need for caution. The chair stood where she'd left it, its elegant lines incongruous amid the barn's decay. In daylight, Elena could better appreciate the craftsmanship, hand-carved details, genuine gold leaf rather than paint, upholstery that despite dust and age still retained rich crimson hue. Such an item belonged in a museum or mansion, not hidden beneath hay, in an abandoned outbuilding. Elena began methodically clearing debris from the barn floor, starting near where she'd found the chair. Hours passed as she moved rotted hay, broken tools, and decades of accumulated dirt. By midday, sweat-soaked and aching, her efforts revealed a patch of wooden flooring different from the rest. Smoother planks fitted more precisely together. Kneeling, she brushed away the last of the dirt, finding an almost imperceptible seam. The floor section was a disguised trapdoor. With trembling fingers, Elena worked her knife into the crack, gently prying until the hidden door lifted. Darkness greeted her, the space below filled with shapes draped in heavy cloth. Using her small flashlight, Elena climbed carefully down the crude ladder into the concealed room. It was larger than expected, extending beyond the visible floor space above. The air felt strangely preserved, protected from the elements that had ravaged the barn's upper level. Her hand reached for the nearest shrouded object, pulling away the covering to reveal a gilded mirror of stunning beauty. Taller than Elena herself, its frame featured intricately carved scenes, hunters chasing deer through forests, nobles dining at lavish tables, dancers in formal attire. Despite decades in hiding, the glass remained mostly intact, reflecting Elena's dust-smeared face back at her in surprising clarity. One by one she uncovered more pieces, a mahogany writing desk with mother-of-pearl inlay, a set of dining chairs matching the one she'd first discovered, oil paintings in heavy frames, porcelain vases, and silver candelabras. Each item spoke of wealth beyond anything Valder Flores had seen in generations. Elena worked in silent amazement, carefully returning each protective covering after examination. As afternoon light dimmed, she paused before the mirror again, studying her reflection. Dust had transformed her hair to gray, smudged her face like aging makeup. For a disorienting moment, she glimpsed not herself but someone else, a woman in elegant clothing with proud bearing and sorrowful eyes. Elena blinked and the image vanished, leaving only her own startled face. That night, Elena made a difficult decision. Rather than returning to her rented room, she would sleep in the barn to guard her discoveries. Using old hay and her thin coat as bedding, she settled near the trapdoor. The gilded mirror, now positioned where moonlight through roof cracks, made it faintly luminous. Sleep came fitfully, strange dreams weaving through her consciousness. In one, a dark-haired woman in 1930s clothing arranged paintings against the barn wall, whispering, "They must never find these. Promise me." Elena woke several times, certain she'd heard footsteps or voices, only to find herself alone in the silent barn. Dawn revealed no intruders, only roosting birds in the rafters. Elena splashed water from her canteen on her face, examining her reflection in the ornate mirror. The woman who gazed back seemed different somehow, still thin and weathered, but with a new alertness in her eyes, a subtle shift in how she held herself. For the first time in years, Elena felt purpose beyond mere survival. Whatever the Montalvo family had hidden here had waited patiently for decades. Now it was her responsibility, her secret to protect, while she determined what these treasures meant and what should become of them. Covering the trapdoor carefully with hay and debris, Elena concealed her discoveries before heading to the village. She needed supplies, better tools, proper lights, a notebook to inventory her finds. The few pesos in her pocket wouldn't purchase much, but she could trade cleaning work at the hardware store for essentials. As she approached the village, Elena noticed several residents watching her, with newfound curiosity. Had someone seen her repeated trips to the bar, or was it simply the mysterious transformation that Elena herself sensed? A woman who yesterday had nothing but today walked with the secret knowledge of hidden treasures, reflected in her bearing. The hardware store owner, Senor Mendez, looked up in surprise as the bell above his door announced her entrance. "Elena, don't usually see you here. I need a few things for my barn," she replied, keeping her voice casual, though the words "my barn" still felt strange on her tongue. "So it's true? You bought that worthless old building?" He chuckled. "What are you planning to do with it?" Elena met his gaze steadily, the elegant mirror and its momentary ghostly reflection fresh in her mind. "Everyone overlooks value in unexpected places, don't they, Senor Mendez?" Elena's systematic exploration of the hidden room continued over the next 3 days. Each item she uncovered, the silver candelabras, hand-painted porcelain, tapestries still vivid despite decades in darkness, told fragments of the Montalvo family's story. But no timepiece revealed why these treasures had been concealed or what had truly happened to their owners. On the 4th morning, Elena noticed a slight irregularity in the floorboards beneath where several carpets had been stacked. The planks here seemed newer than the surrounding wood. Using her newly acquired pry bar, she carefully worked the boards loose, revealing a second hidden compartment. Unlike the main chamber, this space contained only a single item, a heavy chest bound with iron bands, secured with an ornate lock. The chest was smaller than she'd expected, given its obvious weight, perhaps 2 feet long and 18 inches high. No amount of careful effort would budge the lock, and Elena was reluctant to damage what might be a historically significant piece. She sat back on her heels, studying the chest in frustration. Breaking the lock seemed sacrilegious, but without a key, Elena's thoughts returned to the gilded chair. Her first discovery, its ornate, carefully detailed craftsmanship, might conceal more than just artistic flourishes. Taking her small knife, she began methodically examining every inch of the chair, tapping lightly along the carved grapevines and birds decorating its frame. Near the base of one leg, a section of carving gave a slightly different sound. Elena pressed the spot experimentally, feeling a slight click as a tiny drawer, no bigger than a matchbox, slid from the concealed compartment. Inside lay a small brass key with an intricate pattern matching the chest's lock. "Clever," Elena whispered to the empty barn. "Very clever." The key slid into the lock with perfect precision. The mechanism turned smoothly, as if recently oiled rather than neglected for decades. Elena lifted the heavy lid, holding her breath in anticipation. The chest contained no gold or jewels, but something potentially more valuable, Documents, carefully preserved in oilcloth packets. The papers included land deeds, family records, financial documents, and personal correspondence. Beneath these lay a leather-bound album of photographs, and at the very bottom, a portrait miniature in a silver frame. Elena lifted the portrait with reverent hands. A young woman gazed back at her, perhaps 20 years old, dark hair arranged in the style of the 1930s, wearing a pearl necklace against a dark blue dress. The painting captured a quiet dignity in her expression, a certain resolute intelligence in her eyes, written in elegant script on the back. Isabella Montalvo. This was the face Elena had glimpsed in the mirror, not a ghost or dream, but the echo of a real woman whose possessions she now guarded. The photograph album revealed more of the Montalvo family. Don Alejandro, stern but kind-eyed, his wife Carmen, elegant and poised, young Rafael, barely a teenager, and Isabella, whose portrait Elena now held. Images showed the family at their estate, in the gardens now long gone, in the grand rooms of their mansion destroyed by fire. The final pages captured scenes of the village in its prosperous days, with Montalvo employees gathered for holiday celebration. Among the documents, Elena found a family tree tracing the Montalvos back to Spanish nobility. Land deeds outlined the original boundaries of their considerable estate, while financial records detailed investments across Europe and the Americas. Most intriguing were bank documents, suggesting accounts established in Switzerland and France. Accounts that, if still existing, might hold considerable sums. As Elena carefully examined each paper, a partially burned letter caught her attention. Written in hurried script, much of it was illegible, but certain phrases stood out clearly. Warned us they are coming for everything. Committee has listed our name among the traitors, must secure what we can before collection too valuable to fall into their hands. Arranged for transport. Trusted friends in Paris expect. When the political winds shift, we shall return. The letter was signed simply A, presumably Don Alejandro. Its burned edges suggested someone had attempted to destroy it, perhaps interrupted before completing the task. Another document, this one intact, listed in meticulous detail a collection of important artifacts, with annotations about provenance and value. Elena recognized several items she'd already uncovered, but many remained unfound. According to these records, what she'd discovered represented perhaps a third of the Montalvo treasures. As sunset painted the barn in golden light, Elena carefully repacked the chest, her mind overwhelmed with questions. The Montalvos had clearly anticipated danger and taken steps to preserve their most valuable possessions. But had they escaped, as planned? Why had they never returned for these treasures? And most pressingly, where were the remaining items from their collection? She locked the chest, returning the key to its hiding place. In the chair. Tomorrow she would continue her search, armed with new knowledge and a growing sense of responsibility toward both the treasures and the family that had hidden them. But tonight, by lamplight, she would study the documents further, piecing together the puzzle of the Montalvo legacy that had unexpectedly become intertwined with her own fate. The village bell rang 3 times, signaling the mid-morning hour. Elena paused in the market square, adjusting her worn shawl as she felt curious eyes following her movements. A week had passed since her first discovery, and though she'd been careful, subtle changes in how villagers treated her suggested growing suspicion. "Elena, a moment, please," called Senora Torres from her small grocery. The shopkeeper had refused Elena credit just 2 weeks ago, but now she beckoned with unusual warmth. "Good morning," Elena responded, approaching cautiously. "I haven't seen you buying much lately," Senora Torres observed, eyes sharp with curiosity. "I hope you're not going hungry in that barn of yours." "I manage," Elena replied simply. "I could extend a little credit," the woman offered, "now that you're a property owner." Elena suppressed a bitter smile, remembering the woman's previous refusal when need had been greatest. "Thank you, but I'm fine for now." As she continued through the village, Elena noticed similar changes. People who had long ignored her now nodded in greeting, conversations pausing as she passed. Her status had shifted subtly from poor widow to woman of mystery. The change was unsettling. Outside the village council building, Mayor Domingo engaged in animated discussion with two men Elena recognized as his business partners. At 58, Domingo was the wealthiest resident of Valdeflores, owning most remaining businesses and several properties. When his gaze fell on Elena, their conversation abruptly ceased. "Ah, Señora Vasquez," he called, approaching with the smooth confidence of local authority. "Just the person I wanted to see." This. Elena nodded warily, having dealt with the mayor only during her futile requests for assistance after Mateo's death. His help had been non-existent then. "I hear you've purchased the old Montalvo barn," he continued, smile not reaching his eyes. "An interesting investment." "Hardly an investment at $1, Elena replied. "Indeed," he chuckled, "but perhaps I could take that burden off your hands. The property adjoins land I own. I could offer you $50. Quite a profit." The sudden offer confirmed Elena's growing suspicion that something had alerted the mayor. $50, an amount that would have seemed miraculous weeks ago, now struck her as both suspicious and grossly inadequate. "I appreciate the offer, but I'm comfortable there for now." The mayor's smile tightened. "I understand, but the offer remains open. That old structure can't be safe. The council might need to inspect it for code violations. For safety reasons, you understand." The thinly veiled threat hung between them as he tipped his hat and returned to his associates. As Elena gathered her few purchases and headed back toward her barn, the persistent feeling of being watched intensified. Glancing back, she caught sight of Tomas, the mayor's nephew, changing direction to follow her path at a discreet distance. Night fell, and Elena worked by lantern light, carefully documenting each item from the hidden room in a notebook. Her caution had proven justified. Someone was clearly interested in her newly acquired property. But did they suspect the treasures it contained, or was this merely the mayor's habitual land grabbing? A noise outside interrupted her thoughts. Footsteps approaching, trying but failing to move quietly. Elena extinguished her lantern and moved silently to the small window. In the moonlight, she made out two figures examining the barn's exteriors. One she recognized as Tomas, the other remained in shadow. They tested the padlock she'd installed on the main door, whispering to each other. When they moved to the rear of the building, Elena quickly gathered her most important discoveries: the documents, Isabella's portrait, and the ledger concealing them in her clothing before retreating to a dark corner. The men eventually departed without gaining entry, but their entrance confirmed Elena's fears. Someone knew or suspected something about the barn's contents, and her window of secrecy was closing. The following morning brought another surprise. As Elena washed at the village fountain, Señora Martina approached, her ancient face lined with concern. "They're asking about you, child," the old woman whispered. "Mayor Domingo was at my house yesterday, wanting to know what we discussed about the Monte Labels." "What did you tell him?" "That my memory at 93 is selective," she replied with a wry smile. "But be careful. Domingo's father was on the committee that accused the Monte Labels of treason. Some say the family's downfall greatly benefited certain village families." As if summoned by this conversation, the village bell began to ring. Not the regular time signal, but the distinctive pattern calling residents to the square. Within minutes, a small crowd gathered as Mayor Domingo stood on the council building steps. "Friends," he began, voice carrying across the square, "it's come to the council's attention that certain historical matters require clarification. As many know, the old Montalvo property has recently changed hands." His gaze found Elena in the crowd. "For everyone's protection, I must remind all citizens that any artifacts of historical significance discovered in our village must be reported to the council. There are also concerns about structural safety in abandoned buildings recently occupied. The council will be conducting inspections." The message was clear. They were coming for the barn, and soon. As the crowd dispersed, the village bell fell silent, its final echoes fading like a warning across the weathered rooftops of Valdeflores. Elena knew she needed help. Someone with knowledge beyond Flores. Someone without local entanglements. The mayor's thinly veiled threats gave her little time. After careful consideration, she penned a letter to the National University in the capital city, describing in measured terms several items she had discovered of possible historical significance related to the Montalvo family. She included rough sketches of the chair and several distinctive markings from the furniture, but mentioned nothing about the hidden room or the true extent of her discoveries. The letter posted, Elena intensified her efforts to document everything while keeping her activities concealed. She slept in the barn at night, wrapped in a blanket beside the hidden trapdoor, a heavy wooden bar securing the main entrance. During daylight hours, she maintained appearances by walking into the village, doing occasional cleaning work, and carefully observing the growing interest in her activities. Just 4 days after sending her letter, a dusty university vehicle appeared on the village road, drawing curious stares as it passed through the square and continued toward the outskirts. Elena, returning from collecting water at the well, watched in surprise as the car turned onto the rutted path leading to her barn. A man in his 60s emerged, brushing road dust from his tweed jacket. With silver-streaked dark hair and wire-rimmed glasses, he carried himself with the unmistakable air of academic authority. Behind him, a younger woman removed camera equipment from the car's trunk. "Senora Vasquez?" the man called as Elena approached. "I'm Professor Martin Herrera, Department of Historical Preservation." He presented a business card embossed with the university credentials and national seal. "Your letter was most intriguing. You came yourself." Elena hadn't expected the department head to respond personally, much less so quickly. When you mentioned certain Montalvo artifacts, it warranted immediate attention. His eyes conveyed more excitement than his measured tone. The Montalvo collection has been the subject of academic speculation for decades. Elena glanced toward the village. "Perhaps we should continue inside." The professor followed her into the barn, his assistant remaining outside with the equipment. Once the door closed, Elena spoke frankly. "I've discovered more than what I described in my letter, Professor. Much more." "I suspected as much," he replied. "Your descriptions were precise enough to identify Barcelona craftwork from the early 1900s, pieces documented in the Montalvo collection, but presumed destroyed decades ago." Elena moved aside the concealing hay and opened the trap door. The professor's academic reserve momentarily cracked. As he stared at the hidden entrance, "Extraordinary," he whispered. Below, Elena revealed her discoveries one by one. The professor moved with reverent care among the artifacts, occasionally removing white gloves from his pocket to examine pieces more closely. This cabinet, early 18th century, almost certainly from the Toledo workshop, and this silver hallmarks confirm Montalvo provenance. He paused before the large mirror, the Duchess mirror named for its original owner. "We have only black and white photographs in our archives." When Elena showed him the chest of documents, the professor sat heavily on a wooden crate, clearly overwhelmed. "Senora Vasquez, do you understand what you found? This is the most significant historical discovery in the region in 50 years. The Montalvo collection was thought lost during the political purges, looted, destroyed, or dispersed to private collections abroad. Finding it intact, with provenance documentation, it's unprecedented." "What does this mean?" Elena asked. "For the artifacts. And for me, these items belong in a national museum," he said firmly. "They're cultural patrimony of immense value. As for you, as the legal discoverer, you're entitled to a finder's fee, typically a percentage of the appraised value." He adjusted his glasses. "Based on what I've seen so far, that sum would be substantial." "The mayor has been asking questions," Elena explained. "He's threatening inspection of the barn and offered to buy the property." The professor's expression darkened. "I know of Mayor Domingo by reputation. His family benefited considerably from the Montalvo dispossession. I suspect he knows more than he's revealing. What should I do?" "First, We document everything properly." He gestured toward the car outside. "My assistant can photograph each item while I catalog them. Then we register your discovery officially with the National Preservation Office, which provides legal protection against local interference." Professor Herrera removed a small device from his pocket, making rapid calculations. "Based on just the items I've seen, preliminary valuation would exceed $2 million, possibly much more once everything is properly appraised." The figure struck Elena like a physical blow. $2 million, an amount so far beyond her comprehension it seemed almost meaningless. In Valdeflores, where she had struggled for coins to buy bread, such wealth was unimaginable. "The most valuable find may be these documents," the professor continued, examining the chest contents. "They could answer questions historians have debated for generations about the family's fate." He looked up at Elena with genuine respect. "Señora Vasquez, your care in preserving these artifacts is commendable. Many would have sold them quickly to private collectors." "They weren't mine to sell," she replied simply. "They were waiting for someone to find them. I just happened to be that person." The professor nodded thoughtfully. "Perhaps not mere happenstance. Sometimes history chooses its custodians carefully." Morning light filtered through the barn's weathered boards as Professor Herrera examined the structure with growing excitement. His assistant, Clara, methodically photographed and catalogued each item Elena had uncovered, while the professor himself conducted a systematic inspection of the building. "This barn isn't what it appears to be," he declared, tapping the interior walls. "Listen." The sound changed subtly as he moved along the perimeter. Hollow spaces, false walls. This entire structure was purpose-built for concealment. Elena watched as he pulled a measuring tape from his pocket, calculating dimensions. "The exterior measurements don't match the interior. There's nearly 3 feet unaccounted for on this wall." With Elena's help, they began a careful examination of every board, beam, and support. By mid-morning, the professor had located a barely perceptible seam running vertically near a corner post. "Look here," he said, fingers tracing the junction. "See how the grain pattern is interrupted? Masterful craftsmanship, nearly invisible, unless you're specifically looking for it." After several minutes of careful probing, they found a small knothole that, when pressed, released a hidden spring mechanism. With a soft click, a section of wall swung inward on concealed hinges, revealing a narrow passage. "Remarkable," the professor whispered, shining his flashlight into the space. A hidden corridor between walls. The passage led to a small room containing rolled documents secured in metal tubes. Professor Herrera carefully extracted one, unfurling it on a cleared workspace. "Architectural drawings," he announced, eyes widening. "The barn's design plans. Look at the date, 1936. Just months before the family disappeared. The detailed blueprints revealed the barn's true purpose, a carefully designed vault disguised as an ordinary agricultural building. Every hiding place, false wall, and secret compartment appeared in meticulous detail, along with mechanical specifications for the concealment mechanisms. Don Alejandro was an engineer by training, the professor explained. "These are his notations. I recognize the handwriting from archived university records. He designed this entire structure specifically to hide the family treasures." Elena studied the drawings, understanding now why her random discoveries had only revealed a fraction of the hidden items. "There are more concealed spaces, many more," the professor confirmed. "According to these plans, we've found perhaps a third of the hiding places. With the blueprints as their guide, they spent the next several hours locating and opening concealed compartments throughout the barn. Each revealed new treasures. Silver service sets wrapped in oilcloth, jewelry boxes containing heirloom pieces, rare books protected in leather cases. Most significant was a large hidden room accessed through a false section of flooring beneath the hay storage area. Unlike the first hidden space Elena had discovered, this room had been constructed with preservation in mind, lined with cedar, sealed against moisture, with primitive but effective ventilation channels. Inside they found the Montalvo art collection, over 24 paintings carefully wrapped in protective coverings. As they unwrapped the first piece, Professor Herrera gasped audibly. "This is Shepherd at Dawn by Murillo, believed destroyed during the civil unrest." And this, he carefully uncovered another canvas, Goya's portrait of the merchant's daughter. "These are national treasures, Elena Vasquez." Clara, the assistant, worked feverishly to document each painting as it was revealed. "The condition is remarkable," she noted. The preservation measures were extraordinarily effective. By late afternoon, they had located most of the hiding places indicated on the blueprints, though several mechanisms had deteriorated beyond use, their contents remaining tantalizingly inaccessible. The documented items now numbered over 100, ranging from furniture and artwork to documents and personal effects of the Montalvo family. "We should secure these items properly," the professor advised as daylight began to fade. "I can arrange for university security personnel to protect the site while we complete documentation." "With your permission, of course." Elena nodded, still processing the magnitude of their discoveries. "How much do you think it's all worth now?" The professor removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "I hesitate to speculate without formal appraisal, but given what we've found today, the paintings alone, we're likely looking at values approaching $8 to $10 million, possibly more, given the historical significance and the intact provenance." He replaced his glasses, regarding Elena with genuine respect. "But beyond monetary value, what we've discovered today represents an irreplaceable cultural heritage. You've uncovered not just valuable objects, but a hidden chapter of history." As they secured the barn for the evening, Professor Herrera placed a careful hand on one of the architectural drawings. Don Alejandro created this hiding place with extraordinary foresight, clearly intending to return. The question remains, why didn't the family ever come back for their treasures? Elena thought of Isabella's portrait, the young woman's resolute gaze seeming to hold secrets still waiting to be revealed. "Perhaps we'll find that answer too, Professor." Outside, the sunset painted the weathered barn in golden light, transforming the humble structure that had once seemed worthless into what it truly was. A masterpiece of concealment housing one of the greatest private collections ever hidden from history. Mayor Domingo pounded his fist on his polished desk, face flushed with anger. "A university team? At the barn? Why wasn't I informed immediately?" The nervous deputy shifted uncomfortably. "They arrived yesterday, sir. Official vehicle with government plates. They've been inside the barn all day with Senora Vasquez, and no one thought to ask their business?" The mayor's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. "They had credentials, sir. National Historical Preservation Office." Domingo turned to the window, composing himself. The situation was accelerating beyond his control. When he'd first heard rumors of Elena Vasquez finding something in the old Montalvo barn, he'd dismissed them, until his nephew Tomas reported seeing lights there at odd hours, and Elena's suddenly secretive behavior. The mayor opened a drawer and removed yellowed newspaper clippings. The headlines from 1937 blared accusations against the Montalvo family. "Traitors' assets seized. Montalvo treasures missing. Authorities search for hidden wealth." His father, Rodrigo Domingo, featured prominently in the articles as the regional committee chairman overseeing the Montalvo investigation. The family's subsequent prosperity had its foundations in that tumultuous period, though such connections were carefully minimized in official history. If Elena had indeed found Montalvo valuables, complications loomed large. Legal ownership might be murky enough for him to assert village claims, but university involvement meant official documentation and government oversight, dangerous developments for someone with his family history. "Get me everything you can find about this professor," he instructed the deputy, "and double the watch on the barn. No one enters or leaves without my knowledge." After the deputy departed, Mayor Domingo placed a call to a contact in the regional government office, a distant cousin who owed his position to the mayor's political connections. I need information on a historical preservation filing for Valdafres, he explained after pleasantry. Anything regarding the old Montalvo property? The response made him frown deeply. A preliminary protection order had already been filed, temporarily preventing any local governmental interference with the site pending a full historical assessment. The professor had worked quickly. That evening, Mayor Domingo invited his closest allies to his home. His lawyer, the town clerk, who maintained property records, and 2 council members loyal to his interests. They gathered in his private study, where conversation would remain confidential. "The situation is troubling," he began, pouring expensive brandy for his guests. "It appears the widow Vasquez may have discovered items of value in that worthless barn I allowed her to purchase." The lawyer, Senor Vega, raised an eyebrow. "Allow a figure of speech," the mayor smiled thinly, "but the property was sold without proper council procedure. We might have grounds to void the transaction." "On what basis?" the lawyer asked. "Perhaps improper valuation." The clerk failed to assess potential historical significance. The mayor nodded toward the nervous town clerk. "I processed the paperwork as instructed," the clerk protested weakly. The mayor waved dismissively. "No matter, we have other approaches. The barn clearly violates safety codes. It's practically falling down. As mayor, I have authority to condemn unsafe structures." "The protection order complicates that," the lawyer cautioned. "Once the national office is involved, local ordinances are typically superseded." Domingo's expression darkened. "Then we need to move quickly, before their paperwork is finalized." He pulled out a village map, pointing to the barn's location. "This property has strategic importance for our development plans. The road expansion project would benefit from that parcel." One council member nodded eagerly. "We could invoke eminent domain, public necessity." "Precisely," the mayor agreed. "Draft the paperwork tonight. We'll hold an emergency council sessions tomorrow to approve the measure." As the meeting concluded, Domingo retrieved a leather-bound book from a locked cabinet, his father's journal from night. He'd only skimmed it years ago, uncomfortable with some of the frank admissions about the Montalvo siege. Now he needed to know exactly what it contained about the family's missing treasures. Late into the night, the mayor read with growing concern. His father had been convinced the Montalvos concealed significant wealth before fleeing. The official searches had found nothing of value at their estate, leading to speculation about hidden caches or foreign transfers. Most damning were entries suggesting that certain committee members, including his father, had conducted private searches beyond official channels, possibly appropriating items for personal gain. If such allegations became public knowledge now, with the Montalvo collections suddenly rediscovered, uncomfortable questions would arise about his family's wealth and standing. The following morning, Elena found a formal notice nailed to her barn door: "Emergency condemnation and acquisition proceedings. By order of the Valdeflores Village Council, this property is scheduled for immediate inspection and potential condemnation due to structural hazards and required public use. Owner has 24 hours to vacate." As she tore down the notice, Elena noticed something partially hidden beneath a nearby rock: several yellowed newspaper clippings. Picking them up, she found herself looking at decades-old stories about the Montalvo family's persecution, with a younger Rodrigo Domingo prominently featured, the current mayor's father, leading accusations against the family, whose treasures now lay beneath her feet. Someone in the village was sending her a message and providing ammunition for the conflict that now seemed inevitable. Professor Herrera studied the condemnation notice with a deep frown. "This is a blatant attempt to circumvent the protection order. Legally it won't stand, but it could delay our work considerably if we become entangled in local bureaucracy." Elena showed him the newspaper clippings she'd found. "Someone wanted me to see these. The mayor's father led the accusations against the Montalvos." "Not surprising," the professor sighed. "Many powerful families today built their fortunes on appropriated assets during that period. The Domingos were particularly aggressive in consolidating local influence. 2 university security officers had arrived that morning, positioning their vehicle prominently at the barn entrance, a clear message to the village authorities. Inside, the cataloguing continued with greater urgency, Clara photographing each item while the professor documented provenance. Elena returned to examining the ornate chair where she'd first found the hidden key. If it contained one secret compartment, might there be others? She ran her fingers along the carved wooden frame, feeling for any irregularities. Near the chair's back, a small decorative rosette seemed slightly off-center compared to its twin on the opposite side. After several careful attempts, Elena managed to rotate the wooden rosette, revealing another tiny compartment. Inside lay something unexpected, not a key or document, but a small leather-bound book with the initials IM embossed in gold. "Professor," she called, "I've found something else." He examined the book with evident excitement. A diary, Isabella Montallo's personal journal, judging by the initials. This could be extraordinarily valuable for understanding the family's final days. The small volume was filled with elegant handwriting, entries spanning from January 1936 to October 1937, just days before the family's disappearance. Elena and the professor sat together as he carefully turned the fragile pages, translating the most significant passages. The early entries painted a picture of privileged but purposeful life. Isabella, 23 and recently graduated from university in Madrid, wrote of managing estate business, her brother Raphael's studies, and their parents' social engagements. Political tensions appeared as background concerns, occasionally mentioned but not central to daily life. By mid-1936, the tone changed dramatically. "Father gathered us in his study today. The situation worsens in Madrid. Our family name has appeared on a list of enemies of the people. Though we have always treated our workers fairly and supported local villages, our wealth makes us targets. Father speaks of precautions, of securing certain assets. Mother weeps at night when she thinks no one hears." Entries through early 1937 documented increasing preparations. The designing of the storage barn continues. Father works late into the night on the plans. He has always found solace in engineering problems, and this greatest challenge seems to calm his fears. The structure appears simple, but contains remarkable ingenuity. Raphael and I are sworn to secrecy. Even the workers building it know only portions of the design. Later pages recorded the methodical hiding of family treasures. We work at night, moving the most valuable items in small groups. Father insists we maintain normal activities during daylight. I help catalogue each piece as we conceal it, artworks from grandfather's collection, mother's jewelry, family silver, the furniture from Barcelona. Father believes the political winds will eventually shift, allowing our return. We must preserve not just objects of value, but our family's legacy. The final entries grew increasingly urgent. September 30, 1937, Rodrigo Domingo visited today with 2 officials from the capital. Though he smiled and accepted Father's hospitality, his eyes moved constantly, assessing everything of value. He has transformed from childhood friend to something dangerous, ambition and ideology corrupting the boy I once knew. Father says we can delay no longer. October 5, 1937, arrangements are finalized. We leave tomorrow night for the port, then onward to cousins in Marseille. Mother insists we travel light, 1 small case each. Father has transferred funds to Swiss accounts. The most important papers are prepared. I will miss this place that has been our family home for generations. Will I ever see these hills again? The final entry, dated October 7, 1937, was brief and hurried. The car arrives at midnight. Raphael is frightened, though he pretends bravery. I leave this diary hidden in the chair from Mother's morning room. Perhaps the one place they won't think to look. If fortune favors us, I shall retrieve it myself someday. If not, perhaps a kinder future will discover our story and remember the Montalvo name with fairness. Elena and the professor sat in silence after the last entry. The diary ended abruptly. No confirmation of their escape, no hint of their subsequent fate. Just the desperate hope of a young woman facing exile from everything she had known. She never returned for it, Elena said softly. No, the professor agreed, but she entrusted it to the future, to you as it happened. Elena studied Isabella's elegant handwriting, feeling a profound connection to this woman who had hidden her precious possessions with such care and foresight decades ago. Both had faced loss and uncertainty. Both had found themselves custodians of something larger than themselves. We need to know what happened to them, she said firmly. If they escaped, if they survived. The professor nodded. This diary provides critical historical evidence. It clearly documents the family's persecution and the legitimate concealment of their possessions, rather than abandonment or smuggling as was later claimed. He carefully placed the diary in an archival sleeve. This single document could be decisive in establishing rightful ownership of the collection and in challenging certain established narratives about that period. Outside, they could hear vehicles approaching, the distinctive sound of the mayor's SUV, accompanied by several others. The confrontation they had anticipated was arriving sooner than expected. Darkness had fallen over Valdeflores, the moon obscured by gathering storm clouds. Elena stood in the barn doorway, watching headlights wind along the village road toward her property. The university security guards positioned themselves strategically, their official presence the only barrier between the approaching convoy and the treasures, now documented, but still vulnerable. Professor Herrera joined her, expression grim. I've spoken with the ministry. The emergency protection order is officially registered, but Mayor Domingo knows he has a small window to act before federal authorities arrive tomorrow. The approaching vehicles, the mayor's SUV leading 2 pickup trucks, filled with men, parked in a semicircle before the barn. Flashlight beams swept across the weathered structure as doors opened and figures emerged into the night. Elena counted at least 15 men, some carrying tools that could easily serve as weapons. Mayor Domingo approached, his usual polished demeanor replaced by barely contained anger. Senora Vasquez, I have an emergency condemnation order. This structure is unsafe and must be evacuated immediately. One of the security officers stepped forward. This property is under federal protection pending historical assessment. Your local order is superseded. The mayor produced papers with an official-looking seal. This structure poses immediate danger to public safety, a special exemption to federal delays. He turned to Elena. You have 10 minutes to remove personal belongings before we secure the site. Elena recognized several faces among the crowd, men who had ignored her in the market for years, neighbors who had offered no help after Mateo's death. Now they stood with the mayor, lured by rumors of treasure and the prospect of shared spoils. From the back of his SUV, the mayor removed an ancient hunting rifle, the implied threat clear as he rested it casually against his shoulder. We can do this smoothly or with difficulty. The choice is yours. The professor stepped forward. Mayor Domingo, interfering with a federally protected historical site is a serious crime. Your father's involvement with the Montalvo persecution is well documented. Do you really want that history examined more closely? A ripple of unease moved through the gathered villagers. The mayor's face darkened. My father served this community faithfully. Any suggestion otherwise is slander. Elena moved to stand beside the professor. I have documents proving otherwise. Newspaper accounts of your father's role in the Montalvo accusations. Records of property transfers afterward. Is that why you're so eager to seize this barn? To hide evidence of how your family wealth began? Lightning flashed in the distance, briefly illuminating the scene. The tense standoff between the small group protecting the barn and the larger force led by Domingo. This is village property, the mayor insisted. Whatever was hidden here belongs to Valdeflores. That's not what the law says, came a new voice from the darkness. Headlights appeared on the road as another vehicle approached. A battered truck driven by Senora Martina's grandson, The old woman herself sat in the passenger seat, and behind them came several more vehicles carrying elderly villagers, the remaining few who remembered the Montalvo era. Pablo helped his grandmother from the truck, supporting her as she walked slowly toward the confrontation. Despite her 93 years, Senora Martina stood straight, her voice carrying clearly in the night air. "I worked in the Montalvo house for 20 years. Don Alejandro paid fair wages when other landowners exploited their workers. Doña Carmen established the village school and clinic." Her gaze swept over the gathered men. "Now you would steal from the family that built this village." Other elders joined her, sharing similar memories of Montalvo generosity. The mayor's supporters shifted uncomfortably as the narrative they'd accepted of aristocratic exploitation justifying seizure was challenged by their own parents and grandparents. "This is pointless nostalgia," Domingo scoffed. "The past is gone. We're concerned with village interests today." "Your interests, you mean," Senora Martina retorted. "How convenient that property seized from traitors so often ended up in your father's hands." A rumble of thunder punctuated her words as the storm moved closer. Rain began to fall, large drops striking the dusty ground. During this exchange, Elena noticed Professor Herrera discreetly speaking into his phone. He caught her eye and gave a subtle nod. Help was coming, but they needed time. Elena stepped forward, rain beginning to soak her clothes. "I purchased this property legally. What I found inside belongs to history, not to any of us here. The university will ensure everything is properly preserved." "And what do you gain, widow?" the mayor sneered. "Another day of poverty? I'm offering prosperity for the entire village." "You're offering theft," she replied steadily, "just as your father did." Several men from the mayor's group lowered their tools, backing away from the confrontation as the rain intensified. Family loyalties in Valdeflares ran deep, and the elders' testimony had shaken their certainty. Domingo raised his voice over the strengthening storm. "Enough talk. We're taking possession now, under emergency powers." As he stepped forward, headlights appeared on the road, not one vehicle, but several official markings visible on their sides. The regional police had arrived, accompanied by additional university security. The mayor froze, calculations visible on his face as his position rapidly deteriorated. The rifle lowered slowly as he recognized the futility of his show of force. "This isn't over," he said quietly to Elena. "There are other ways to assert village claims." As the police approached, the villagers dispersed quickly, melting away into the rain-soaked darkness. Only the mayor remained, his authority diminished, but his determination unbroken, as he retreated to his vehicle. Thunder crashed overhead as Elena watched them leave, the barn and its treasures secure for now. But in the lightning flashes, she could see the mayor's face through his car window, a look that promised this confrontation was merely the opening move in a longer battle. Dawn broke over a transformed landscape. The university team had expanded overnight, with 3 additional vehicles arriving carrying specialists in art conservation, antique furniture, and historical documentation. A temporary security perimeter surrounded the barn, and uniformed officers checked credentials at a makeshift checkpoint. Elena watched from the doorway as white-gloved experts carefully moved items from the hidden spaces to examination tables set up under portable lights. Each piece was photographed, measured and assessed with scientific precision before being wrapped in protective materials and placed in secure transport containers. Professor Herrera approached, accompanied by an elegant woman in her 50s, whose bearing suggested authority. "Senora Vasquez, may I present Dr. Lucia Navarro, Director of Acquisitions for the National Museum." "Your discovery is extraordinary," Dr. Navarro said, shaking Elena's hand warmly. Professor Herrera's initial report seemed almost fantastical, but seeing these items, she gestured toward the activity around them. "It exceeds all expectations." "What happens now?" Elena asked. "We'll complete a preliminary valuation today," Dr. Navarro explained. "Our experts will assess each item based on established criteria: provenance, historical significance, condition, rarity, and market value. This gives us a foundation for discussing next steps. Throughout the morning, Elena observed the evaluation process, overwhelmed by the technical terminology and staggering figures mentioned in casual conversation. A silver tea service was valued at $45,000. A single painting at $3,000. The ornate chair that had started everything, $28,000, as a standalone piece, but considerably more valuable as part of the matched set they had subsequently discovered. By midday, the specialists gathered in a circle of folding chairs, comparing notes and consolidating figures. Dr. Navarro invited Elena to join them. "We've completed our preliminary assessment," she began, opening a leather portfolio containing meticulously prepared documents. "I want to emphasize that these are conservative estimates based on current market conditions, historical significance, and provenance verification." Elena nodded, hands clasped tightly in her lap. "The total preliminary valuation of the Montalvo collection as documented thus far is $12.4 million. The figure hung in the air. Elena stared at Dr. Navarro, certain she had misheard. "That's impossible," she whispered. "I assure you it's quite accurate," Navarro replied with a gentle smile. "In fact, it may increase substantially once we complete authentication of several key paintings and assess the Swiss bank records found among the documents." Professor Herrera leaned forward. "Elena, as the legal discoverer and property owner, you're entitled to a finder's fee under national cultural heritage laws. Typically, this amounts to 25% of the total valuation." Elena did the calculation slowly. $3 million, more money than everyone in Val de Flores combined might see in a lifetime, more than she could comprehend after years of counting pennies for bread. "There are several options for how we proceed," Dr. Navarro continued, presenting a folder of documents. "The National Museum would like to acquire the collection intact to preserve its historical significance. However, you may choose museum acquisition, private auction, or a combination approach." Elena leafed through the papers, the legal terminology swimming before her eyes. What would each option mean? Museum acquisition provides immediate compensation based on the agreed valuation, Dr. Navarro explained. Private auction potentially yields higher returns, but introduces uncertainty and delays. Some collectors would pay premium prices for specific pieces, and the items themselves. Where would they go? The museum would preserve the collection intact, with major pieces displayed in the national galleries. We would create a dedicated Montalvo exhibit, documenting both the family's history and the remarkable story of your discovery. As they discussed options, Elena noticed new activity at the security perimeter. Journalists arriving with cameras and microphones. Word had spread beyond Valaflaras. Professor Herrera followed her gaze. "The discovery is becoming national news. The Montalvo mystery has fascinated historians for decades. Finding the collection intact is unprecedented." Elena thought of her small rented room in the village. The years of struggle since Mateo's death, her son Miguel working in a distant city factory. How quickly life could change, from desperate purchase of a dollar barn to discussions of millions. "I need time to think," she said quietly. Of course, Dr. Navarro assured her, these decisions shouldn't be rushed. "We can arrange for financial advisors and legal counsel to assist you." As they spoke, a conservation specialist approached with a document. "Dr. Navarro, we've completed authentication of the Goya portrait. It's genuine, with an estimated value of $1.8 million alone." Elena felt the room spin slightly. From $1 to millions in mere days, a transformation so profound she could barely comprehend its dimensions. Later that afternoon, alone in a quiet corner of the barn, Elena unfolded a worn photograph of Mateo and Miguel taken years earlier, during happier times. What would Mateo make of all this? The hard-working man who had never complained about their poverty would hardly recognize the world she now navigated, of museum directors and million-dollar paintings. Things will be different now, she whispered to his image. Professor Herrera found her there, respecting her silence for a moment, before speaking. The appraisal documents are ready for your review. When you feel prepared. Elena carefully returned the photograph to her pocket. Before I look at those papers, I need to understand something else first. What's that? What really happened to the Montalvos? Did they escape? Did they survive? I feel I owe them that much to know their fate before I benefit from what they left behind. The professor nodded thoughtfully, a proper conclusion to their story. I believe we might find answers among the documents we've discovered. With your permission, I'll make that our priority. Outside, camera flashes illuminated the gathering crowd as journalists documented the recovery of one of history's lost treasures and the unlikely woman whose dollar had purchased not just a weathered barn, but a second chance at life.
The village square of Valdeflores buzzed with unusual activity. Journalists from national newspapers interviewed elderly residents about their memories of the Montalvo family. Television vans with satellite dishes crowded the narrow streets. Curious visitors from neighboring towns wandered through, hoping to glimpse the now famous barn, or perhaps the woman who had purchased it for $1. Elena watched from the shadows of the church portico, still uncomfortable with her sudden notoriety. 3 weeks had passed since the valuation, and life in Valdeflores had transformed in ways both subtle and profound. The mayor had retreated from public view, his authority diminished by the failed midnight confrontation and subsequent revelations about his family's history. The village council, sensing shifting political winds, had distanced themselves from his actions. Senora Torres, who had refused Elena credit for bread mere weeks ago, now rushed to serve her, offering the finest products with effusive smiles. Other villagers who had long ignored the widow now greeted her warmly, some even claiming long-standing friendship. The hypocrisy was not lost on Elena. These same people had watched her struggle after Mateo's death, offering neither help nor kindness. Now that fortune had found her, their memories conveniently transformed. A team of architects and engineers arrived that morning, unfolding large blueprints on tables outside the village cafe. Curious onlookers gathered as the professionals discussed renovations to the village center. Elena had commissioned these plans with her first advance payment, a vision for revitalizing Valdeflores rather than abandoning it for a wealthier life elsewhere. The lead architect, Senora Mendez, noticed Elena and waved her over. "Perfect timing, Senora Vasquez. We were just discussing the mill restoration." Elena examined the detailed drawings showing the abandoned lumber mill transformed into a working facility once again. "Is it feasible? After so many years of neglect?" "Entirely possible," the engineer confirmed. "The basic structure remains sound. Modern equipment will actually require less space than the original machinery, allowing for additional workshop areas." The renovation plans represented Elena's vision for the future of Valdeflores, a village reborn from the ashes of decline. The restored mill would provide employment for at least 30 villagers. A small museum dedicated to the Montalvo collection would occupy the renovated town hall, drawing tourists and scholars. The central plaza would feature shops selling local crafts and products. "We can begin work next month if the permits are approved," Senora Mendez explained. The first phase, mill restoration and plaza improvements, completed within 8 months. As they discussed details, Elena noticed Pablo, Senora Martina's grandson, watching from a distance. Unlike others who had suddenly discovered goodwill toward her, Pablo had always been kind, offering small courtesies even during her poorest days. Later, as she walked toward the newly established project office, Pablo approached hesitantly. "Senora Vasquez, may I speak with you?" "Of course, Pablo, and please call me Elena." "I wanted to thank you," he said, gesturing toward the architects and their plans. "When grandmother told me what you intended for the village, it means I might stay in Valdeflores after all." Like so many young people, Pablo had been preparing to leave for city employment. A skilled carpenter trained by his grandfather, he found little use for his talents in the dying village. The mill will need craftsmen, Elena told him. Would you consider a position as workshop manager? We'll need someone who understands both traditional methods and modern equipment. His face brightened with surprise and hope. I would be honored. This was the real satisfaction Elena had discovered. Not the millions in her new bank account, but the ability to create opportunity where despair had reigned. Each job created meant another family staying together, another piece of community preserved. As word spread of her plans for revitalization, Elena received an unexpected visit from Tomas, the mayor's nephew who had once spied on her barn activities. "I've come to apologize," he said awkwardly, standing at her temporary office door. "What my uncle asked me to do was wrong." Elena studied the young man thoughtfully. "And now that he's lost influence, you've had a change of heart?" Tomas flushed with embarrassment. "I deserve that, but it's more complicated. The stories coming out about my grandfather's actions during the Montalvo persecution. We never knew, or perhaps chose not to know. His sincerity seemed genuine. Like many in Valdeflores, Tomas was navigating a community transformed, old power structures crumbling, long-buried truths emerging. "What will you do now?" Elena asked. "I've applied for the electrician training program for the mill renovation," he admitted. "If you'll allow it," Elena nodded slowly. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Tomas, even those of us who made mistakes." That evening, Elena walked to the small cemetery where Mateo rested. She placed fresh flowers beside his simple marker, tracing his name with gentle fingers. "The strangest part," she told him quietly, "is remembering how desperate I felt buying that barn. My last dollar, what you would have called foolishness." She smiled at the memory. "Now I'm planning renovations that will cost millions, and it feels right. Not the money itself, but what it can build." From her pocket, she removed architectural renderings of a new building planned for the village edge, a medical clinic named for Mateo. The facility would ensure no one in. Valdeflores would again suffer without treatment as he had. "This is your legacy too," she whispered. "Everything grows from seeds we planted together." As darkness fell over the village, lights shone in previously abandoned buildings where restoration teams now lodged. Valdeflores had awakened from decades of decline, stirring with possibilities that Elena's single dollar had somehow purchased, not just for herself, but for an entire community, reborn from the legacy of a barn that everyone else had deemed worthless. The manila envelope arrived by courier, its official stamps and seals making Elena's stomach tighten instinctively. Inside was a formal court summons, naming her as defendant in a civil action filed by the Valdeflores Municipal Council claiming rights to historical artifacts of community significance discovered on improperly transferred public property. Mayor Domingo might have retreated from public view, but his influence remained. Though no longer able to seize the barn through force or emergency orders, he had found another avenue of attack: the courts. Professor Herrera frowned as he reviewed the document in Elena's temporary office. This was predictable. The mayor's trying to create legal delays while he repositions politically. Can he win? Elena asked. Unlikely, the professor replied, but legal battles consume time and resources. He's betting you'll settle rather than endure prolonged litigation. There's more, Elena said, showing him a second letter that had arrived that morning. This one came from a Barcelona law firm representing descendants and legal heirs of the Montalvo estate, contesting her ownership of the discovered items. Interesting timing, the professor mused. I wonder if the mayor reached out to distant Montalvo relatives to complicate matters. Within days, Elena found herself at the center of a legal storm. 3 separate claims now challenged her rights to the discovery. The village council, purported Montalvo descendants, and a regional historical society arguing the entire collection belonged to the state regardless of where it was found. her modest office filled with legal advisors provided by the National Museum, who patiently explained complex points of cultural heritage law, property rights and historical preservation statutes. The technical language and endless procedural details left Elena feeling increasingly overwhelmed. "I just wanted a roof over my head," she confessed to Professor Herrera during a rare, quiet moment. "Now I need 3 lawyers to understand what's happening." "That's exactly what the mayor is counting on," he replied. "He thinks you'll break under the pressure." What Domingo hadn't counted on was Elena's quiet resilience, the same determination that had kept her alive through years of poverty and grief. She might not understand every legal term, but she recognized the tactics of intimidation. The preliminary court hearing took place in the regional capital, a 3-hour drive from Valdeflores. Elena entered the imposing courthouse flanked by museum lawyers, feeling desperately out of place in her best dress, purchased second-hand years ago for Miguel's graduation. Mayor Domingo sat confidently at the plaintiff's table with his legal team, nodding to political connections in the gallery. When Elena entered, his expression registered momentary surprise. Perhaps he had expected her to send representatives rather than appear herself. The judge, an elderly woman with sharp eyes and no-nonsense demeanor, called the court to order. "This preliminary hearing will address standing and jurisdiction for Case 347B, Valdeflores Municipal Council versus Elena Vasquez regarding ownership rights of historical artifacts." The village attorney presented their case first, a technical argument about improper property transfer and community heritage rights. The mayor occasionally leaned forward to whisper in his lawyer's ear, clearly directing strategy. When Elena's lead attorney rose to respond, he opened not with legal arguments, but with a document from the hidden chest. "Your Honor, we submit as evidence the original deed to the property in question, dated 1934, clearly establishing that the barn was private Montalvo property, never municipal land. It was erroneously seized during political persecutions and never legally transferred to village ownership." The judge examined the document with interest. "This appears authentic. How do you respond, Counselor?" The village attorney faltered. "We question the document's provenance, Your Honor." "It was found among verified Montalvo papers," Elena's lawyer countered, "with consistent aging, paper composition, and historical context. We have expert authentication." As the technical arguments continued, Elena noticed the mayor's growing discomfort. He hadn't expected such compelling documentary evidence, clearly believing the historical record incomplete. When the judge called a brief recess, Professor Herrera approached Elena with another document from his briefcase. "We found this while organizing the Montalvo papers," he said quietly. "It might be useful today." Elena examined the yellowed document, a ledger page showing financial transactions between Rodrigo Domingo and government officials in 1937, with notations beside the Montalvo property parcels. "Is this what I think it is?" she asked. The professor nodded grimly. "Evidence suggesting the mayor's father paid bribes to ensure certain properties were allocated to him during the seizures, including the land surrounding your barn." When court resumed, Elena's attorney presented additional evidence systematically dismantling the village's claim, culminating with a formal letter from the National Historical Preservation Office declaring the Montalvo collection protected cultural patrimony. Under federal jurisdiction, the judge listened attentively before delivering her preliminary ruling. Based on evidence presented, this court finds the plaintiff lacks standing to claim municipal ownership of the artifacts in question. The property transfer to Senora Vasquez appears legal and binding. The federal protection order remains in effect pending full trial, a small victory, but only the beginning. Outside the courtroom, reporters gathered as the mayor pushed past, refusing comment. Elena stood on the courthouse steps, surrounded by her legal team, but feeling strangely alone amidst the technical victory. The litigation would continue for months, the Montalvo heir's claims still pending, appeals certain, more hearings inevitable. That evening, returning to Valdeflores, Elena visited the barn that had started everything. Construction crews had stabilized the structure. Security systems now protected the remaining artifacts, and conservators continued their careful work. In the soft evening light, the humble building seemed to hold wisdom accumulated during its decades of patient waiting. Elena placed her hand against the weathered wood, drawing strength from its resilience. "They won't wear me down," she promised quietly. "Whatever comes next, I'll see this through." Professor Herrera worked methodically through the Montalvo documents, creating a comprehensive catalogue of the family's papers. The legal challenges had intensified his efforts to establish definitive provenance for every item. In the small office adjacent to the barn, shelves now held carefully labeled archival boxes containing organized records spanning generations of Montalvo history. "Elena, could you bring the blue folder with the banking records?" he called, comparing notes on his laptop. "I'm cross-referencing the Swiss account numbers." As Elena retrieved the requested documents, her hand brushed against the ornate, iron-bound chest where they'd found the first cache of papers. Something about the chest had always seemed odd, its proportions slightly irregular compared to typical document boxes of the era. "Professor, have you ever measured the interior dimensions of this chest?" He looked up, intrigued. "No, I don't believe so. The conservation team examined it structurally, but we were focused on the contents." Elena ran her fingers along the interior, pressing gently against the wooden panels. "The external depth is greater than the internal space. There might be a false bottom." Together they carefully removed the remaining documents, examining the chest's construction with renewed attention. After several minutes of gentle probing, Elena found a nearly invisible seam running along the interior base. When pressed in sequence at the corners, a hidden panel lifted, revealing a shallow, concealed compartment. Inside lay a single envelope, sealed with wax bearing the Montalvo family crest. Unlike the other documents, this one showed no signs of hasty preparation or duress. The elegant handwriting addressing it to whomever finds our legacy appeared careful and deliberate. This was hidden separately from everything else, Elena observed. Deliberately concealed even from those who might find the chest itself. Professor Herrera carefully photographed the envelope before Elena gently broke the wax seal. Inside was a letter written on heavy stationery, dated April 12, 1952, 15 years after the Montalvo family's disappearance. Elena read aloud, "To the finder of our family's legacy, if you are reading these words, you have discovered what we were forced to leave behind. My name is Isabella Montalvo. My family fled Spain in October 1937 when political forces marked us as enemies despite our lifelong dedication to our community and workers. We escaped first to France, then to Argentina, where distant relatives sheltered us. The journey was perilous, traveling under false names, abandoning privilege for survival. My brother Raphael nearly died of pneumonia during our crossing. Mother never recovered from the trauma of leaving our ancestral home, passing away in 1942, still dreaming of Spanish hills. Father intended to return when circumstances changed, maintaining detailed records of everything we concealed in the specially designed barn. He corresponded secretly with loyal friends who kept him informed of conditions in Spain. When he learned of the fire that destroyed our family home in 1950, something broke within him. He died 3 months later, our legacy becoming a burden he carried to his grave. I write this letter during a brief secret visit to Spain, my only return to my homeland. I traveled under an assumed name, knowing it remains unsafe for a Montalvo to be recognized. Tomorrow, I shall place this letter in our hidden chest, then depart knowing I will never see Valdeflores again. To whoever finds our possessions, I do not return to reclaim them. That chapter of history has ended. The Spain we knew exists now only in memory. I make only one request, that some small portion of what you've discovered helps preserve the true story of our family's commitment to Valdeflores and its people. The rest should serve whatever good purpose you, as their discoverer, deem worthy. History has chosen you as the custodian of our legacy. I trust it has chosen wisely. If you wish confirmation of our family's fate, visit the Montalvo Mausoleum in the cemetery of San Miguel in Barcelona. There you will find markers for my parents and eventually myself, though our physical remains rest elsewhere. I arranged this to provide closure to our family story. With gratitude for completing a circle broken by history, Isabella Montalvo Diaz. Silence filled the room as Elena finished reading. The letter provided the answers she had sought, confirmation that the family had escaped, that they had lived out their lives in exile, never reclaiming their concealed treasures. She came back, Elena whispered, just once, to leave this message, and to ensure whoever found the collection would know they had the family's blessing. The professor added, this letter effectively refutes the claims of any supposed heirs currently challenging your rights. Isabella explicitly granted ownership to whoever discovered their legacy. Elena carefully returned the letter to its envelope. We need to visit the Barcelona cemetery. 3 days later, they stood before the imposing Montalvo family mausoleum in the historic San Miguel cemetery. The stone structure reflected the family's former status, though decades of neglect had left it weathered and overgrown. Inside, they found what they sought, marble plaques commemorating the family members, including one for Isabella herself. Dated 1987, she lived to be 73, Elena said softly, touching the cool marble. A full life, but in exile. Professor Herrera examined the inscriptions carefully. These confirm everything in her letter. The Montalvos survived, but never publicly reclaimed their identity in Spain. As they prepared to leave, Elena noticed something tucked into a small recess beside Isabella's plaque, a faded photograph showing an elderly woman standing before a modest home surrounded by bougainvillea. On the back, written in the same elegant hand as the letter, my home in Córdoba, Argentina, 1985. The image completed the circle somehow, the young woman from the portrait found in the barn, transformed by time and experience. Her face lined but dignified, still carrying the resolute intelligence Elena had recognized in her younger image. Isabella had entrusted her family's legacy to an unknown future finder. By chance or fate, that person had been Elena, another woman whose life had been defined by loss and resilience. She made peace with what happened, Elena said as they departed the cemetery. Now I can move forward with absolute certainty about what should be done with her family's treasures. The regional courthouse buzzed with unusual energy. Journalists filled the public gallery, and even standing room reached capacity as the culmination of the now famous barn treasure case prepared to unfold. After months of preliminary hearings, procedural delays and legal maneuvering, the final judgment would be rendered today. Elena sat quietly at the defendant's table, dressed in a simple but elegant navy suit, a far cry from the second-hand dress she'd worn to the first hearing. Beside her, Professor Herrera offered a reassuring smile, while her legal team organized final documents before them. Across the aisle, Mayor Domingo conferred with his attorneys, his once confident demeanor now tinged with obvious strain. The prolonged legal battle had drained municipal resources and damaged his political standing. Even if he prevailed today, the cost had been substantial. At the adjacent table sat representatives claiming Montalvo family connections, distant cousins from Madrid who had emerged seeking shares of the fortune. Their case had steadily weakened as authentication of Isabella's final letter and cemetery records confirmed the direct family line had ended. The bailiff called for all to rise as Judge Mariana Solano entered the courtroom. Known for her meticulous attention to detail and no-nonsense approach, she had managed the increasingly complex case with remarkable efficiency. "Be seated," she instructed, arranging papers before her. After reviewing all submitted evidence, expert testimony and relevant legal precedents, This court is prepared to render judgment in the consolidated cases regarding ownership rights to the so-called Montalvo collection. The courtroom fell silent as she continued. This case has raised significant questions about historical justice, cultural patrimony, and the intersection of private property rights with public interest. I have considered all arguments thoroughly. She addressed each claim systematically, beginning with the Montalvo relatives. Regarding the inheritance claim filed by the Madrid Montalvo descendants, this court finds insufficient evidence establishing direct lineage from the Valdeflores Montalvos. Furthermore, Isabella Montalvo's authenticated letter explicitly relinquishes family claim to the discovered items, granting ownership rights to whoever discovers our legacy. This claim is therefore denied. The Madrid attorney began to object, but the judge continued without pause. Regarding the Valdeflores Municipal Council's claim of community ownership, this court finds that the barn and surrounding property were never legally transferred to municipal ownership. Documentation proves the property was privately owned by the Montalvo family, improperly seized during political persecution, and subsequently sold to Elena Vasquez in a legitimate transaction. The municipal claim is denied. Mayor Domingo's face darkened as he whispered urgently to his lawyer, who merely shook his head in response. As to the Regional Historical Society's assertion of state ownership under cultural patrimony laws, while the artifacts indeed constitute significant cultural heritage, the law clearly establishes finders' rights in cases where items were deliberately concealed by their original owners with intent to reclaim. Isabella Montalvo's letter confirms this intent, though circumstances prevented the family's return. The society's claim is denied. Judge Solano looked directly at Elena now. This court therefore rules that Senora Elena Vasquez, as legal purchaser of the property and discoverer of the concealed items, holds rightful ownership of the Montalvo collection, subject to standard cultural patrimony regulations regarding export restrictions and public access rights. She lifted her gavel, then paused. However, before concluding, I must address one additional matter. Evidence presented during these proceedings has raised serious concerns about the historical persecution of the Montalvo family and subsequent appropriation of their assets. Testimony and documentation strongly suggests that Rodrigo Domingo, acting in official capacity, may have engaged in improper conduct, resulting in personal enrichment. The mayor shifted uncomfortably as the judge continued. This court hereby refers these matters to the National Historical Reconciliation Commission for investigation. While these events occurred decades ago, justice has no expiration date. The gavel fell with finality. Court is adjourned. The gallery erupted in murmurs as reporters rushed for the exits, eager to file their stories. Mayor Domingo hurried out a side door, avoiding the press gathered in the main corridor. Elena remained seated, momentarily overwhelmed by the conclusion of the battle that had consumed months of her life. The victory seemed almost anticlimactic after the intense legal struggle. "Congratulations," Professor Herrera said warmly. "History has been served today, as has justice," added her lead attorney, gathering papers. "The ruling is comprehensive and leaves little room for effective appeal." Outside the courthouse, villagers from Valdeflores had gathered, not supporters of the mayor, but those who had benefited from Elena's revitalization projects. They cheered as she emerged, Senora Martina at the forefront despite her frailty. "I knew you would prevail," the old woman said, embracing Elena. "The Montalvos would be pleased their legacy found such worthy hands." Later that evening, as sunset painted Valdeflores in golden light, Elena walked alone to the barn where everything had begun. The structure now stood renovated and secure, its historical significance preserved, while its contents had been carefully catalogued and mostly transferred to temporary museum storage. She unlocked the door and stepped inside, remembering that first day when desperate need had driven her to spend her last dollar. The space felt different now, no longer filled with hidden treasures, but somehow still holding the echoes of its remarkable past. From her pocket, Elena withdrew the judge's ruling, the formal document confirming her ownership and rights. More than legal validation, it represented vindication of her instincts in purchasing the barn, her care in preserving its contents, and her vision for transforming tragedy into renewal. The mayor's public disgrace seemed a fitting conclusion to generations of injustice. Already there were whispers of his resignation, his political future destroyed by revelations about his family's historical misconduct. As darkness fell, Elena locked the barn and turned toward the village center where construction lights illuminated ongoing renovation work. The legal victory had cleared the way for her plans to proceed without constraints. The museum, the revitalized mill, the community restoration already transforming Valdeflores from a dying village to a place of renewed possibility. Justice had indeed been served, not just for Elena, but for the Montalvos, for Valdeflores, and for history itself. 6 months of intense work transformed the Valdeflores village center. The dilapidated town hall, once symbolic of the community's decline, now stood restored to its original 19th century grandeur, its facade gleaming in the spring sunshine. Inside, the building had been repurposed as the Montalvo Vasquez Museum, its rooms carefully designed to showcase both the treasures discovered in the barn and the remarkable story behind their finding. Workers positioned a bronze plaque beside the entrance, the morning light catching the freshly engraved words, "The Montalvo Vasquez Museum, where history's legacy meets new beginnings." Elena ran her fingers over the lettering, still hardly believing the journey from that desperate dollar purchase to this moment. "Perfect timing," called Professor Herrera, approaching with a clipboard. "The Minister of Culture arrives in 2 hours, and the installation team needs final approval on the central display." Inside, the museum hummed with last-minute preparations. The main gallery featured selected Montalvo treasures, the paintings, furniture, and silver, now professionally displayed with museum-quality lighting and climate control. A separate room housed documents and photographs telling the family's story, including Isabella's final letter in the cemetery, photograph that had completed their historical detective work. Most poignant was the special exhibition Elena had insisted upon, a recreation of the barn, interior showing how the treasures had been hidden. The original chair that had started everything occupied a place of honor, its secret compartment revealed through clever design, allowing visitors to discover it just as Elena had. "Senora Vasquez," a young museum assistant approached hesitantly. "Your son has arrived." Elena hurried to the entrance, emotion overwhelming her as she saw Miguel for the first time in nearly 3 years. At 23, he looked older than she remembered, his face leaner, shoulders broader from factory work. He stood uncertainly, holding a small duffel bag, taking in his mother's transformed appearance with visible amazement. "Mama," he whispered as she embraced him. "You're home," she said simply, holding him tightly. Their reunion had been delayed by practical necessities, the legal battles, Miguel's work commitments, the whirlwind of change that had consumed Elena's life. Though they had spoken by phone, nothing could prepare either for the reality of their changed circumstances. "I don't understand all this," Miguel admitted as Elena led him through the museum. "Your letters explained, but seeing it," he gestured around them. "It's like a dream." "For me as well," she agreed. "Every day I expect to wake up in our old room, counting pennies for bread." As they toured the exhibits, Elena introduced Miguel to Professor Herrera and the museum staff, each greeting him with respect that clearly surprised the young man accustomed to invisibility in his factory job. "And you'll be staying?" Miguel asked cautiously, the question containing deeper meanings about their future. "Valdeflores is our home," Elena confirmed. "I've built a new house near the barn, nothing extravagant but comfortable." "Your room is waiting," she hesitated. "That is, if you want to stay." I understand you've built a life in the city. Miguel looked around at the bustling activity. The village visible through the windows, now showing signs of revival, fresh paint on buildings, new shops preparing to open, the distant silhouette of the mill under reconstruction. I gave notice at the factory last week, he said with a small smile. I thought perhaps there might be work here. The mill will need a mechanical supervisor, Elena told him. Someone who understands both maintenance and operations. Your factory experience would be valuable. The possibility of working together to rebuild their community hung between them. A future neither could have imagined when poverty separated them years earlier. By midday, the museum filled with dignitaries and press. The Minister of Culture cut a ceremonial ribbon, delivering a speech about cultural preservation and rural revitalization. Regional officials praised the economic impact of the project. Cameras flashed as Elena, still uncomfortable with publicity, said a few modest words about historical responsibility. What touched her most deeply, however, came later that afternoon, when the museum opened to local residents. Villagers who had witnessed her struggle now walked respectfully through exhibitions detailing both the Montalvo history and Elena's discovery. Children gazed wide-eyed at the recreated barn hideaways, while elderly residents recognized family members in historical photographs of village life during the Montalvo era. Senora Martina arrived supported by her grandson Pablo, her ancient face alight with satisfaction as she examined displays featuring her recollections of working in the Montalvo household. You have honored them well, she told Elena, gripping her hand with surprising strength. And you have saved our village when we had given up hope. Professor Herrera gathered attention for a toast, raising a glass in the central gallery. To the Montalvo family, whose foresight preserved these treasures, he began. To Elena Vasquez, who discovered them when hope seemed lost. And to the remarkable intersection of histories that brings us here today. He turned to Elena, genuine admiration in his expression. What appeared to be the end of two stories, a destitute woman spending her last dollar and a persecuted family hiding their legacy, has instead become the beginning of something extraordinary. The Montalvos would be proud to see their treasures serving as catalyst for renewal rather than remaining symbols of tragedy. As sunset painted the museum in golden light, Elena stood beside Miguel, watching villagers move through the exhibitions with growing pride in their community's newfound significance. The barn that had once represented her desperation now stood preserved as a historical landmark at the village edge, while here in the center, the museum would draw visitors and scholars for generations. Is it strange? Miguel asked quietly. Having your name beside theirs, when just a year ago we had nothing. Elena considered the question, watching an elderly couple examining Isabella's portrait with reverent attention. We never had nothing, she corrected gently. We had each other, this community, and the stubborn hope that kept me searching for shelter that winter day. She smiled at her son, seeing Mateo's features in his face. The dollar that bought that barn was my last, but it turns out its value was beyond measuring. 1 year after the museum's opening, Valdeflores bore little resemblance to the dying village where Elena had once struggled for survival. The renovated village square bustled with activity, cafe tables filled with visitors, new shops displaying local crafts, and freshly planted trees providing shade against the summer sun. Elena crossed the square, exchanging greetings with shopkeepers and residents who now regarded her with a mixture of respect and affection. Her modest home, comfortable but far from ostentatious, stood on a gentle rise overlooking both the village and the preserved barn that had changed everything. Though she could have afforded luxury elsewhere, Elena had chosen to remain in Valdeflores, investing her unexpected wealth in the community's renewal. The restored mill operated at full capacity, employing 38 villagers, including Miguel, who had proven himself an adept mechanical supervisor. Lumber production had expanded to include fine furniture crafting, capitalizing on renewed interest in traditional techniques inspired by the Montalvo collection. Senora Vasquez called Pablo from the doorway of his new carpentry studio. The school tables are ready for delivery. Elena smiled, entering to inspect the beautifully crafted furniture destined for the village school, another restoration project nearing completion. Young apprentices worked under Pablo's guidance, learning skills once feared lost to the village. "They're perfect," she approved, running her hand along the smooth wood. "The children will be delighted." Where despair had once permeated Valdeflores, optimism now flourished. Families who had left in search of opportunity elsewhere began returning, renovating abandoned homes and opening businesses. The village population had grown 15% in a single year, including several young families with children, a demographic shift unimaginable during the years of decline. Tourism provided steady income, with visitors drawn by both the museum and the village's emerging reputation for authentic craftsmanship. The mayor's position, now filled by a respected teacher following Domingo's resignation in disgrace, focused on sustainable development, preserving Valdeflores' historical character while embracing new opportunity. In the afternoon, Elena met with representatives from neighboring villages who had traveled to study the Valdeflores revitalization model. Seated in the former council chambers, now a community center, she shared practical insights about rural economic development. The most important element wasn't the money itself, she explained to the attentive group. It was redirecting resources to build on existing strengths, traditional skills, historical significance, natural beauty. Every village has unique assets worth preserving. After the meeting, Elena walked to the cemetery where Mateo rested. She had commissioned a proper headstone to replace the simple wooden marker, though keeping it dignified rather than ostentatious, as he would have preferred. Fresh flowers from her garden brightened the peaceful spot. "You should see Miguel at the mill," she told her husband's memory. "He's developed a new cutting technique that increases efficiency by 20%, just like you would have done." The setting sun cast long shadows as Elena made her way to the barn, her regular evening ritual regardless of weather or season. The structure had been carefully preserved, its historical significance protected, while subtle reinforcement ensured it would stand for generations. A discreet pathway allowed visitors to view the exterior. Though the interior remained private, Elena's personal sanctuary, inside, the barn stood mostly empty, the treasures now properly housed in the museum. Only the chair remained, the original catalyst of discovery that Elena had requested remain in its birthplace. She sat in it occasionally, connecting to that moment of desperate hope when a dollar purchase revealed unexpected possibility. Miguel joined her as darkness fell. Their evening conversations, a cherished ritual re-establishing bonds stretched by years of separation. Foundation Board approved the expansion proposal, he reported, referring to the Montalvo Vasquez Rural Renewal Foundation Elena had established with a significant portion of her finder's fee. 3 more villages will receive development grants next quarter. Elena nodded with satisfaction. The foundation represented her vision for extending Valdeflores' good fortune beyond its boundaries, supporting struggling rural communities throughout the region with targeted investments and technical expertise. The university partnership is confirmed as well, Miguel continued. They'll send architectural students next semester to document historical structures in the participating villages. As they walked back toward the village, lights twinkled welcoming in homes that had stood dark and abandoned just 18 months earlier. The transformation seemed almost miraculous, though Elena knew it represented countless hours of hard work, careful planning, and community determination. "Sometimes I still can't believe it," Miguel admitted, echoing her thoughts. From nearly losing everything to all of this, Elena thought of the long journey, from the desperate woman spending her last dollar on a seemingly worthless barn to her current role guiding regional development. The wealth itself had proven less significant than the purpose it provided. the ability to create opportunity where hopelessness had reigned. "We didn't just find treasure," she replied, watching villagers gathering for an evening concert in the square. "We rediscovered what makes life worthwhile: community, purpose, the chance to build something lasting." Near the square, a tourist couple approached hesitantly, the woman clutching a museum guidebook. "Excuse me," she said. "Are you Elena Vasquez, the woman who found the Montalvo collection?" Elena smiled gently. "I'm just someone who bought a barn for $1 when I needed shelter." She gestured toward the vibrant village scene before them. What came after was beyond anything I could have imagined. As they continued toward the concert, Elena reflected on the remarkable circle completed, how a family forced to abandon their treasures had inadvertently preserved not just objects of value, but the seed of renewal for the community they had once nurtured, and how her own desperate act, driven by immediate need, had ultimately yielded abundance beyond measure. The dollar that had seemed her last hope had proven merely the first investment in a future richer than any hidden treasure could provide.